welcome everyone to the June 16th edition of QT Chats, the new abbreviated name of Quarantine Chats, because I got tired of typing the whole thing, apparently, on the slide. Just before we get started, a quick shout out to everyone watching the recording or watching on Facebook Live. If you would like to join on to the next session or even this current one, if you're speedy, please do visit our homepage of our website. There's a convenient link where you can click that button, join through, very free and easy to join up on the Zoom meeting here, and you can get your questions answered live by us and our panelists for the next one. This is a Q&A kind of style of event. We do have some content to run through to sort of guide the conversation, but these things are always best if you put in your questions and we're able to chat through them and answer them. There's a few ways to do that. So if you go to the chat function and in Zoom, you can change it to all panelists and attendees and then type in your question there. You can raise your hand so we can unmute your mic and you can come on there. Or you can use the Q&A feature and we can answer those. We do try and stop and answer them as we go. So if you have something that you would like to say, or if you just want us to repeat something, then feel free to type it in and or raise your hand and we'll come back to it. So today, here's the agenda. So we'll do sort of our usual thing where we run through the news first, and then we're going to get into some cybersecurity topics. And I know there were a lot of people looking forward to this topic here. So loosely speaking, we'll talk about the rough landscape, common tactics that hackers use, some business hygiene and things that we can all do to reduce our risk. Introductions. Many of you all know me, the founder of Entreflow Consulting Group. What should I say today to introduce myself? I've got 2 kids. This Entreflow is my second startup. I have never been hacked, but I can't say that's because I was being careful. Oh no, actually I was hacked one time. And I got a virus on my machine, and that was very painful, but I was able to get some help with that. So that was a good story for me. But my businesses have fortunately escaped cybersecurity issues, luckily for me, but I know a lot haven't. I'm very, very pleased to introduce to you today Louie, Augard, and Sanjay Behal from OmniCyber Security. And can you introduce yourself, Louie?
Yeah, of course. Thank you very much. My name's Louie Augard, and I have the worst job title in the world. I'm a penetration tester. I've been one now for about 9 years, and essentially what my role is to break into organizations, to show them where the weaknesses are within their cybersecurity landscape. Hopefully today we're going to be looking at some relatively interesting things for you guys, as well as some kind of stories from bits and pieces of work that I've done in my past and present, and hopefully get you in a suitable position where you feel more confident moving forward in the cybersecurity world.
Very good. And as you can probably tell, Louie is not in Canada. He's actually joining us from the remote outskirts of Birmingham in the UK. And we're very pleased to have our first international panelist on these QT chats. So thanks very much for joining us.
No problem.
Sanjay, can you say hello as well?
How do I follow after Mr. Penetration Tester just jumped in? My title's far less exciting, and I'm the Director of Business Development here in North America for OmniCyber Security. And I'm essentially building out the practice that Omni has very well established in the UK. And I will be assisting businesses as they start to look for services related to penetration testing. I'm sure there's going to be some jokes tossed around with that, but in any case, looking forward to connecting with some folks after. I'll pass it back to you, Ian. Thank you.
Sounds good. Now, you'll notice as well that on our profiles here, I've got no background. Louie is a circle and Sanjay is a square. That has absolutely no meaning, but it was just to throw you off. A little bit about Entreflow. We're a small team of consultants, CPAs, MBAs, HR experts, etc. And we really love working with small and growing companies that are up to big things and perhaps don't have much of the infrastructure that some larger organizations do, and they're focused on building products, market fit, growth, and scale, and some help is needed to get from A to B in terms of accounting, CFO services, financial planning, systems, or maybe it's HR and you need to hire or have a hiring plan or just deal with some of the fundamentals, and a little bit of marketing strategy. It's very easy to do the fundamentals, but how do you sort of scale that up? So we're really big into scaling companies and figuring out systems that work. So we're excited to be putting on these quarantine chats to help businesses through some tricky times in 2020. And very pleased as well to have Startup Vancouver and by extension Startup Canada as our partner in presenting these. Colin's on the line. Can you say hello and introduce what Startup Vancouver is?
Absolutely, I will. Thanks, Ian. I was trying to come up with some clever response to Louie's title there, but I figured anything I say would somehow destroy whatever little credibility I have. So I'm not going to say a darn thing. So we're going to leave that to work on your title there, Louie. That's on you, man. My name is Colin West, and I'm the co-founder and community leader for Startup Vancouver, which is one of over 40 chapters of Startup Canada across the country. And Startup Canada is the voice for the over 3.5 million entrepreneurs in this great land of ours. We are here to connect entrepreneurs to resources, each other, events, tools, mentors, both locally, regionally, and nationally. We are a volunteer-based organization of entrepreneurs for entrepreneurs. So we are very honored to now, gosh, I guess this is what, about week 13, 14 or so that we've collabed here with EntreFlow for QT chats, as we're calling it now. And it's been a real pleasure doing this. And for us to be able to amplify your signal, that's what we do. We're here to collaborate and we're here to connect.
Very cool. Thank you. Thank you, Colin.
Ian, thanks again for letting us be a part of all the good things you do. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for your support. I'm going to run through the news. We have had actually a new announcement from Mr. Trudeau, and that will affect some of us. So we've heard that the Canada Emergency Response Benefit is going to be extended. So we don't have the details on exactly what that means yet, but for some of the founders or business owners who have lost their income through COVID and are wondering what's going to happen after the 16-week period of the benefit, what's going to happen, and that's probably early July that runs out, and it seems that Mr. Trudeau is going to extend that. So we're waiting for some further input from the government on that, but it looks like there will be further funds through CERB. In the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy, it turns out that the budget is going to be cut for this. The budget was $78 billion or something like that, and they've cut it to, I think it's $48 billion. The cut is not because they're trying to squeeze businesses or they don't want to do this, it's that not enough businesses are using it. So the message is encouraging business owners to use the emergency wage subsidy, hire back employees if they've had to lay people off, and just keep people working. Otherwise, perhaps those funds are going to be diverted into other programs. So if you're on it, if you, they may even have new what do you call it, requirements, eligibility requirements that they might roll out. So keep an eye on CEWS. If you haven't used it yet, consider it again, and watch for new announcements there. And then the last thing that was announced was that the CEBA, the 40K business loan, will start accepting new applications again on Friday, and they've expanded again the eligibility requirements for that. So some sole proprietors are included, farmers, etc. We're going to be watching for more details on what's allowed to be funded through CEBA, what kind of businesses or requirements you might have. So that's the news, some interesting updates from the feds there. And I always like to include some positive news in here. So I found a cool widget from a company called Visual Ping. They're a local company. And this is for companies that are, or any kind of organization really, that is trying to keep their audience informed on COVID stuff and what they're doing, and you know, maybe the plans for opening things up and how that's going to go. So they actually provided a free widget for these kind of organizations to use, and they've got other cool technology otherwise, which you might want to check out. This other one is not a business, but I just had to include it because it's just too good. There's a group that's just a grassroots sort of group, 5 friends out in the Fraser Valley, that decided it would be really great to be able to deliver wine or gifts or something. So like a ninja, you sort of run up and drop something on maybe an elderly person's doorstep who's still not, who doesn't want to go out of the house because they're vulnerable health or something like that. And maybe you can drop off some cookies or some wine or something. And the idea is you just drop it and run and take some photos and post them as you go. And it's just a fun way of engaging with the community. And also it involves wine, so can't go wrong. Okay. That title is wrong. It's meant to be about cybersecurity. So this is some things that actually, before I get into this, I normally pause, and I just want to say, is there anyone else who had any other news that I maybe missed? Please do type it into the chat or raise your hands if there's a government program or some kind of announcement that I've missed that will help businesses. Then please just do say that. Okay, skipping back. So the reason why we're doing this talk now, and why I invited Sanjay and Louie here, is because cybersecurity it's a big problem. Sometimes this falls under the sort of purview of the CFO, and our company does CFO services. So we're thinking about risk management. Business continuity is a huge concern when a big pandemic comes through and wipes out all your plans, yes, but also it sort of opened up a lot of issues for cybersecurity. People are doing a lot more virtual working and less able to collaborate in normal ways. So it's even more of a concern now. And already, so here's a stat. So cyber attacks do affect small businesses. You see in the news, it's more announcements about large companies that have been breached or large healthcare organizations that have been breached, but actually a significant portion of them are on small businesses and startups. So it's topical. And also the impacts for small businesses are really big. So there's one survey or assessment that said that 50% of victims of cybersecurity attacks actually have to stop operating their business and are not able to recover. So with my CFO services hat on, or my CFO hat on, I'm thinking business continuity, big risk for an organization, especially in these times. So that's why I wanted to bring in Omni and see what they have to say about cybersecurity in general and specifically in these kind of times. So Louie has some slides that he wanted to share with us. So Louie, if you want to go ahead and take over the screen, then you can take us through the stuff that you had prepared.
Perfect. I think I need to share screen there. Lovely. Have you all got my screen?
We do.
Perfect. Thank you very much for the introductions today, especially to the guys at Entreflow for putting everything on. I'm going to be running through a few things with you lovely, lovely people. I have cut out the introduction slide to myself, as you've already had the spiel about me, but there will be some contact us kind of details at the end of this presentation, should you want to reach out to myself or Sanjay in the future. So first things first, I want to talk a little bit about ethical hacking. Cybersecurity as a whole is a massive subject, so it's easy to bring it down into something which is almost contradictory to itself. Hacking, how can it be ethical? But in essence, it can. And this is where penetration testing comes in. Just to give you a little bit of an understanding, kind of to my own personal background, I am a penetration tester. I know there was the comment, why couldn't I be an infiltration tester? Somebody thought it would be a great idea to give us this name, and you have no idea how many times I've been slapped on a night out for saying that I am one of these things. So penetration testing is essentially the art of trying to break into organizations to be able to find security holes and obviously push them back to the client in a report. Quite simply, it's acting like a thief to catch a thief. I know it may sound a little bit crazy, but that's kind of the ways that we get taught in. And surprisingly, cybersecurity doesn't always come in a cyber sense. There's also a physical aspect to it as well. So it kind of can be a combination of trying to hack into websites or break into buildings. It's really, I think the easiest way to explain it is if you've ever seen the film Ocean's 11, it's like that, but there's more Doritos and more Mountain Dew. It's the easiest way to put it. So there have been many kind of breaches that have happened over the last few years. And obviously, I appreciate that some of the businesses that are with us today might be small. Some of them might be kind of looking to push 40 to 50 heads, and some might be up in the hundreds. But this does affect all size of businesses. And I hope you can kind of see that from these breaches that I've got in front of you now, there are some really notable organizations that have actually been hacked. And there's a couple of ones that I want to pull out, which I personally find really interesting. But first things first, I guess I'm not quite sure how it works with people being able to just talk over me, but if anybody has anything that they want to say as we go through, such as if I say, has anybody heard of these companies? And somebody says yes, we can have a little bit of a discussion about it, but I'm not sure whether it works like that, Ian.
Yeah, by default, the mics are muted. So if you want to say something, you have to raise your hand. But that doesn't work for a quick jump in. So it's easier to just type something into the chat if you have a quick, yes, I've heard of MySpace.
Everybody should have heard of MySpace. No, that's perfect. So I'll run through some of the ones that I think are quite interesting anyway. And the first one on there that I personally love as an attacker is the Adobe breach. So the Adobe breach happened maybe 6 or 7 years ago, and it actually affected 140 million people. Basically, all of their credentials were leaked, and their passwords were in an encrypted format. So you couldn't read the passwords, but you could read the email address and the password hint. So for a hacker at this point, it becomes a bit like a crossword puzzle, trying to work out people's passwords from their password hints. Some are really obvious, some are not, and you kind of find yourself looking at it as if you were sat there with a morning coffee and in the local newspaper. But personally, I think the most interesting one on there is Ashley Madison. Now, for those who have heard of Ashley Madison and those who hadn't, it's an organization that you sign up to have affairs. This obviously is a very controversial subject as it is. So imagining all of those people that got their accounts leaked from this website, they were going to be in for a bad time. And what actually made this really interesting was that the attackers didn't sell the data primarily. They actually used it to extort all of the users that had their accounts leaked. So instead of saying, look, we're going to sell you data from the dark web, it's, look, pay us 2 Bitcoins or we'll tell your partner that you've been cheating on them. So there's some really good examples of some big businesses that have been attacked, and these have all happened in numerous methods that we'll speak about as we go through the presentation. So looking at all those big businesses, it's easier if we break them down into sectors. This is kind of a threat report from 2019. Obviously, we haven't completed 2020 yet, so we can't tell you what that looks like, although I think many of us are kind of hoping that 2020 goes by quicker than how it has felt so far, and I'm sure guys in lockdown can appreciate the same thing. This is a really interesting thing, though, because it shows us a breakdown of the kind of sectors that are targeted the most. And I'm not sure how relevant some of these sectors are to you guys as organizations, but it's really interesting to look at the numbers. So public, why do we think public is, the highest? It's got 2,000 breaches. And there's a couple of good reasons for that. One, the poor public sector have to report when they get breached. Not every company does. I think people have probably seen with Uber in the last year that they were actually breached a long time ago and never reported it. So the public sector do actually have to report when they get breached. But also they house quite juicy information. Who wouldn't want to go after kind of, doctor's notes from the doctor's surgery, or information about criminals from the police. There's loads of juicy information that's there. And then third thing is just that it's kudos. If you're a malicious hacker and you want to break into somewhere, if you're going to break into a .gov or a .edu domain, something that's run by the government, you're going to look much more cool to all your friends, because they do run in kind of weirdly braggy little circles. Obviously, moving on down from that, we've got information. Now, information is purely for financial gain, breaking into these types of businesses. So this is looking at things such as IT, third-party IT support companies, anybody that runs data centers or has information stored in data centers, anything that just generally contains a lot of information about people. And obviously, there's got to be a reason for people doing this. So I'll try and put a little bit of a financial kind of swing on it for you. So let's say you've got a business of 1,000 employees. In the UK, I'm not quite sure what it's like in Canada, but in the UK, when you start to work for an organization, you have to give them a copy of your driver's license or your passport and a utility bill, just to prove that you are who you say you are. I think in Canada, is it a social security number and a utility statement or something?
It's not required by an organization, but it's very common to request some documentation.
Yeah, of course. So they might scan that, and then they might upload that to their HR systems or into the cloud where it could be stored. That type of information has value, and I'm going to pick on you all the time as we go through, because you're the only person that can talk to me directly. But how much do you think one social security number and one passport scan might be worth?
Oh,
so the scans of it.
I have no idea. $100.
I'd probably say it's probably similar to $100 Canadian. I think it's £40 Great British sterling. I'm not quite sure what that equates to.
That's probably about right.
Yeah, exactly. So if you had an organization of 1,000 people and you could sell it for $100 pop, you've just made yourself $100,000, and that's quite a substantial amount that you could make as a malicious actor by selling this kind of information on the dark web. And that kind of personal data does actually carry some weight anyway, because if somebody was, especially in the UK, if somebody was to have a passport scan and a utility bill, they could go and open a bank account for you. You wouldn't even know. It's quite scary from that perspective. But moving down, we kind of go into the lesser bulk of the breaches, which is the financial services, professional, retail, legal, education, and manufacturing. The reason why a lot of these sectors are so low is because many of them still are very paper heavy. And these areas, they just don't have the type of the massive information that attackers like to go after specifically. Financial services is going to be the highest on that list anyway. The clue's in the name. People want to go after money. So when you're looking at big accounting systems like Sage and things like that, those are going to be primary targets for any attacker, because they think, hey, if I can get into their Sage system, I can start sending some money X, Y, Z. Lovely, thank you very much. So we've kind of looked at some big companies that have been breached. We've spoken about the sectors that get touched. I think it's really important to talk about the types of people that perform these attacks, because at the end of the day, if anybody is to be a victim of cyber crime or cyber terrorism, I think it's really important to at least be able to attribute where those things have come from and why you've been hit by them. So right down the very bottom, we have what we aptly call in the UK, and probably in the States and in Canada as well, as script kiddies. And script kiddies is basically what you'd envisage a hacker to look like. So when I say hacker, I expect most people to respond with 17-year-old kid in his mum's basement in his boxers with a green and black screen drinking a can of Red Bull. I mean, that's how we're portrayed in the movies anyway. But script kiddies are essentially kids that don't particularly know much better at that time. They're really there as a kind of a learning experience. They're very curious. They like to meddle with things they shouldn't sometimes. But generally, they don't really know what they're doing, and often they don't know the consequences of what they're doing either. A nice example of this is there was an attack that happened a few years ago on the PlayStation network. I'm sure that many of you have kids, and your kids have PlayStations, or you have PlayStations. So on Christmas Day, I think it was 3 or so years ago, the PSN went down, and that was due to a group aptly called the Lizard Squad performing a denial of service attack. This is where they take servers offline. They actually attributed this back to two 15-year-old kids that had been given a tool by the level above, an organized crime unit, to actually run. And they didn't know what they were doing. They didn't know what the tools did. They just run them, and consequentially, lots of bad things happened. So that takes us up nicely to the organized crime level. And that really is anything for financial gain, whether it's stealing data, blackmail, extortion, card skimming, anything that you can do where you make a little bit of money. That's what these guys are all about. And you'll see it's very common for these types of units to take in younger script kiddies and basically pass them programs and give them things to do that they know they shouldn't. It's very similar to things such as county line drug running, which is what we have here in the UK, and it's a big problem where big kind of drug lords and kingpins, they hire a bunch of 12-year-olds to go and take drugs across the country because they won't get stopped anywhere. Moving up from organized crime, we fall into the state-sponsored category, and these are organizations that are government funded. It's basically the easiest way to put it. I'm not sure kind of what you have in Canada in terms of government-funded organizations to protect you from cybersecurity or perform attacks, but in the UK, there are kind of a couple of subcategories. We have hacktivists, which many people believe, people like Anonymous, are funded by the government, but we also have private sector companies such as Raytheon, which also get given money by the government basically to potentially hack or develop ways to stop attackers. The next step up from that is one that I do not profess to know too much about, and I don't think many people know much about unless you are in that area, in which if you're in that area, you've probably signed the Official Secrets Act and all sorts anyway. But nation state is what it says on the tin. It's country versus country. So it would be looking at things like the UK's GCHQ, China's Axiom, the CIA. Those are the types of organizations that sit within this level. And you'll notice on the left and right hand side, we've got kind of two lines. On the left hand side, we've got the identification and recovery. So this is basically showing you that at the bottom, it's easy to identify if you've been attacked by a script kiddie, and obviously the chance of recovering your data or recovering your losses from it are probably going to be quite high because it's so identifiable. Moving up to nation state, where the chances are if you get hacked by a nation state, there's probably not much coming back from it. The last APT I looked at, Advanced Persistent Threat, which is a piece of malware, was about 800,000 lines of code, which was, as you can imagine, a very, very fun week for me. On the right hand side, we've got the complexity as well. Obviously, script kiddies not particularly knowing what they're doing. They're going to be using quite primitive attack methods, ones that you can find online and you can easily get the exploits for. Whereas moving all the way to the top, which is extremely complex nation state attacks, and as I just said, 800,000 lines of code is pretty nutty. So again, we've looked at who gets breached, we've looked at why people get breached, and we've looked at the people doing the attacking. I think it's really important to understand some common tactics and ways that people break into places, and then talk a little bit about how we can go and prevent ourselves from having these types of things occur to us. So the first one, I'm sorry, I don't know if anybody saw that. There was just a massive bolt of lightning behind me. The first one is ransomware. And ransomware has become more prominent over the last few years. And essentially what it does is it locks up your entire computer and encrypts all of the files and says, hey, look, you need to pay us X amount of money or you're never going to get your files back. Obviously, this can be some financial gain for the attacker, but mainly it's just a nuisance for you and a bit of a disruption. Now, the biggest or most notable ransomware attack that's happened in the last few years was something called WannaCry. And in the UK, that actually shut down several trusts of our National Health Service, took them completely offline, and they don't turn on even kind of critical machines for fear of this ransomware bug taking over it. And in essence, it hit 52 countries and it infected a hell of a lot of computers. But when the actual financial data was released for it, it only actually made the attackers, I think it was £16,000. So what's that, $30,000? It's not a lot of money considering, how many people they actually hit. Now, the best way to get around ransomware is just to have backups of everything that you do. You might have pictures of you and your precious kids off in Marbella or down in Florida or wherever you like to holiday. just put them on a USB drive, or, you know, even if you feel uncomfortable with putting them on the USB drive and leaving them somewhere, then, you know, things like Google Cloud's really good, iCloud's really good. These types of storage solutions that we have available to us in kind of an expanding space of the internet is a really nice place to store certainly personal data, because at the end of the day, whether you get a new PC or a new laptop or a new phone, that data is always going to be there and you can back up and restore from it. And that's pretty much the easiest way to get around it. Obviously, if you are to get hit by ransomware, my honest kind of judgment would be just to say, do not pay it. Please do not pay it. Just wipe the PC and start again. At the end of the day, if you pay something, you get put onto a hit list. And this hit list is more likely to be repetitively targeted because they know that you're somebody who's willing to pay. And so they'll just keep trying to hack you and keep trying to hack you and keep trying to send you things that might, you know, kind of lock up your PC. Moving on from that is credential-based attacks. Now, we're going to talk a little bit more about passwords and passphrases in depth in a couple of slides anyway, but credential-based attacks are pretty simple. I'm going to be honest here and say that, you know, 93% of people have had a password that's in the top 1,000 most guessable passwords. I'm one of those people. I've had a password before. I'll put my hand up, being completely honest. I think lots of people have. But in essence, that my PC could probably break through 500,000 passwords in a second. So if you're in the top 1,000 passwords, it's not going to be in a good place for you. I'll give you a really nice story about this, actually. I was working at a UK government organization that houses lots of pension details here. And you know, we sat in, we plugged in through the phone. We went in through the phone line, and then we managed to get onto their primary domain, which is where all their network was. And we actually found an administrator using the password of password123 with a capital P. And that was the foothold or the linchpin that allowed us to steal 60 million sets of pension details, including my own. So that month I stole my own pension details, which was quite interesting. Again, I'll talk about passwords more in depth as we move through, but long story short, make sure it's long, make sure it's secure, don't write it on post-it notes. Moving on, we've got breaches based on known vulnerabilities. Now, as software gets older, new versions come out, security researchers and malicious guys themselves like to have a tinker at old pieces of code that are lying around. Let's look at something like Windows 7, for example. That operating system went end of life a couple of years ago, I think, and is no longer supported by Microsoft, and there'll be no further patches or security updates to them. And now Windows 7 has a really big vulnerability that allows an attacker to break into it in about 30 seconds if they're quick. It's pretty nutty. So the problem is that issue is never going to be fixed because they've stopped showing support to that piece of software. So at the end of the day, the biggest kind of message from this is just purely keeping programs and applications and operating systems up to date. I know it's a pain in the ass when Windows flips up and says, hey, you've got to restart your PC if you want us to, you know, if you want to be up to date. And I'm like, postpone, 4 hours, postpone. And I know it can be painful, but honestly, just let it do its thing. It is the best thing that you can possibly do. Social engineering. Now, this is purely my favorite part of ethical hacking. This is targeting the squishy things behind the keyboard. It's looking at hacking you as individuals rather than technology. Now, it comes in many flavors, but there's a couple that I really like to speak to you about today. And the first one is phishing. Now, phishing has been quite a hot topic for the last year or two, and it's certainly become more prominent in this kind of remote working era with COVID-19. This is just down to the fact that more people are having to rely on technologies to do their day-to-day jobs, you know, people that perhaps wouldn't have spent so much time at a computer as they normally would. This is prime for, you know, people who are performing phishing attacks to maybe take advantage of some of the less technically able people that are out there in the world. Now, phishing tends to come in two flavors. You get mass mailing and you get targeted phishing. Now, mass mailing is your standard run-of-the-mill, I'm going to send out 4 million emails, and if someone comes back to me, it's wonderful. Now, this mass mail might look like a lovely gentleman from a church in a potential continent that says, if you Western Union us $300, then we'll send you 25 million in return. I think everybody's probably had one of those. And it might be a fun fact for you that these scams or mass mail phishes are specifically made to look awful and unbelievable and so bad that if anybody does actually fall for them and is guilty of kind of falling for it, then they know that they can take that person to town. Again, you send out 4 million emails, you just need one person to respond. Now, moving up from that is what we call targeted phishing or spear phishing. Now, spear phishing is a little bit more complicated, and it's targeted at a specific organization. So let's say, for example, we take Cybersecurity, and this is how I would spear phish our own company. What I would do is I'd go onto the website, I'd look at, the About Us page and see that, I'm a person there, Sanjay's a person there, we've got a couple of other members of staff on the page as well, and there's a contact us section. So I'd probably hit up the contact us section. I'd say, look, I want to buy 20 pen tests. You're going to make one of our salesperson's day if you do that. So they're going to get back to me as quickly as possible, and in that, they're going to give me an email signature. Now, email signatures are a little bit crazy because we often overlook them, but subconsciously, they are the thing that make us believe that an email is authentic and from that person. So what I would then do is I would take our email signature, I would then create an email address and create an email address, potentially omni with 2 I's, cybersecurity.com. And I might clone Office 365 onto that page. And I think everybody knows what Office 365 when I speak about the email platform. If there was the URL mail.omnicybersecurity.com and that had an Office 365 login, I would then email everybody in the company saying, hi, it's Louie from IT, or whatever IT guy's name is. We've had a lot of complaints recently about the size of mailboxes. Could you please click this link and, just accept the policy, and you should find yourself with an extra 50 gig in the next 2 hours. Thanks very much. Louis, the IT guy, or something like that. And because it has our company's email signature and, it looks authentic, it's pointing to an OmniCybersecurity domain, it's probably from an OmniCybersecurity email address. It's a lot of people are going to fall for it. And we actually performed this against a bank with a working from home policy, and we probably got about 40 out of 60 sets of usernames and passwords for people's email accounts, which is quite scary. And then there's kind of 2 more sects to social engineering, which I think are really interesting, and these are more confidence tricks. So the first one is vishing or pretexting. Now, pretexting is purely coming into a conversation with a state of authority. Obviously, I appreciate that this example might be a little bit different to what could happen in Canada, but Ian, if I said to you, who's your mobile telephone provider?
TELUS.
TELUS, did you say?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. Tell us, or tell like
TELUS. TELUS.
TELUS. Okay, got it. Cool. Right. Let's say you've had a really bad day with their customer service, and you've been taking Twitter by storm. You've been atting them every way you possibly can, and you're having a little bit of a social justice warrior moment. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna phone you up, and what I'm probably going to say something along the lines of, hi, it's Louie calling from TELUS. We've recently noticed that you've had some problems with some of our loyalty advisors, and I'd really like to talk to you today about some rewards that we can offer you, just to ensure that you're happy being a customer with us. Can I please get your first name, date of birth, and secret words so that I can confirm I'm talking to the right person? And
yeah.
In that case, I haven't even let you said hello once you've picked up the phone. I've just gone straight in with the script, and then, I'm not quite sure what their security protocols are at TELUS, but it's very common in the UK to have first name, date of birth, and a secret answer or a secret word. So what I would do is get all that information about you, which is lovely. I've got your name and your date of birth, and that's a little bit of data that I've got about you. But that's not all I could do. I could then actually phone up TELUS as yourself and say, hey, look, I'm starting a new business. I'd need 10 iPhone X contracts taken out, please. Can you ship the phones to this business address? And we'll start the rolling invoice for the monthly costs. Thank you very much. I've just made £10,000 because I could go and flog those phones on eBay or something for $1,000 a pop. And it's essentially quite a scary way just to be breached from a phone conversation. Now, the best way to get around that is to, always say, if you're getting called from a big company, look, I'll call you back. Let's make sure that you are the correct person that I'm talking to. And then finally, the last kind of social engineering point I want to touch on is physical. Now, physical, everybody kind of assumes it's stuff that you see in movies, but it's actually a really prominent thing with cybersecurity, because at the end of the day, if somebody can get into your building, get to your servers, plug something into your server room or your rack, it's game over. There's many technical barriers as you have from the perimeter or in your network. If somebody has physical access to your server, you're not going to get very far. So there are loads of ways that people break into buildings, but the most common one is tailgating. Simply holding the door open for somebody else or letting somebody follow you through. There have been loads of really good kind of stories about this. And my own personal one was that I was, testing a big organization, massive in fact, and they have kind of a campus rather than an office. And I went to first, so I just graduated out of uni, so I was quite young. Still didn't know how to wear a suit, still don't know how to wear a suit now. So turned up in a pretty shabby looking suit, CV in hand, laptop bag in the other. And at 10:30 in most organizations, people have a break. And unfortunately, I am one of those people that does smoke on occasion. So I went outside at 10:30. I made my way into their smoking area. I sat down, sparked up a cigarette, and started to look basically bloody nervous. And you know how every company has a mum. For some weird reason, they all have one person that looks after everyone. And essentially, what happened was that mum came over to me and she said, "Oh, you're all right, love." And I was, no, I'm really nervous. I'm having an awful morning so far. I feel nauseous. I've got an interview. And she's like, "Oh, don't worry. We'll take you inside." She walks me straight past reception into like a little kind of canteeny area, gets me a drink. And she's like, "Oh, I'll go back to my desk. I'll wait for the call for somebody to take you up for your interview." And I was like, "Oh, that'd be wonderful. Thank you." And basically, I said to her, "Look, I really feel like I'm going to throw up. I don't feel good at all." And she's like, "Oh, I'll send you to one of the quiet bathrooms." And so she sends me off down the hall. I think I went up 3 flights of stairs and across 2 corridors. Got up there, tidied up my suit, chucked the CV in the bin, wandered off, found the IT room, sat down, plugged in. How long do you think I was there for before somebody questioned me or kicked me out?
Probably a fair while.
Yeah.
I'd say, yeah, an hour. I don't know.
No, they thought I was a contractor, so they gave me a temporary pass. I went to a different building in the campus for the rest of the week, so I didn't see the woman again. And in fact, I've still got a few of them as friends on Facebook, and I went to birthday drinks. So you do get some funny ones with physical security. But that's social engineering in a nutshell, and I appreciate that I can waffle about these things for years. So finally, in the common tactics, we'll look at DDoS attacks. Now, distributed denial of service attacks are purely taking something offline. Generally, this happens when you basically want to draw someone's attention from somewhere. You take them offline, and you might, if you take the website offline, they might not realize that you're hacking something else in the distance because they're too preoccupied with what's currently going on. Chapter 2. Home hygiene. We'll quickly run through a couple of ways that you can keep yourself more secure at home, because I appreciate that that's really important at the moment to feel safe and secure in your own work environment. So there are a few things that you can do on the internet. And now I know this might be playing kind of simple to some people, and this might be something new for other people. So please bear with me. But the first thing to look at that is really important is a padlock in the HTTPS. When you're browsing a website that's asking you to put in any card details, it's asking you to maybe submit any personal information, always make sure that the HTTPS kind of part in the URL is visible and there's a padlock. HTTPS is basically the secure version of the hypertext transfer protocol, and that essentially means that the data that you're sending to the server will be encrypted. Now, antivirus, I know it can be a pain in the ass when it decides that it wants to scan your PC for no inherent reason. Then it says that all of your things are viruses, even though they're not. It's really good to have a strong antivirus. Even on Windows, I would recommend at least having Windows 10 Defender enabled, purely for the fact that it's something, and that if you are to, for example, download a malicious attachment from an email, this might be the last line of defense that stops you from opening it. You know, if somebody sends you an email which is, oh, I've got your kid's school report or something like that, and you want to obviously see what your kid's school report is, so you double click it and this might pop up saying, are you sure you want to do that? Really, really good advice to have it kind of just installed on your personal PCs. So there's a couple of things to look out for as well when you're receiving these emails that might have such malicious attachments. Generally, if someone tries to point you to a link to something saying, hey, look, buy this, or, you know, you're eligible for a refund on something, click this link, look at the domain name. And when I say domain name, I mean the URL that's kind of in the top bar of the browser. This can often be a really big clue as to whether something's legitimate or not. And a lot of us can kind of overlook some really tiny mistakes that are actually in there. So just make sure you're being extra careful at reading these things and you're not falling for something like Amazon with a 0 instead of an O, because it does happen a lot. Or if people have something that might be like amazon.shop.com. Now, Amazon is not the domain there. Shop is the domain there because it comes after the first word. Essentially, with these, you're looking at anything that's closest to the .com or the .co.uk to make sure that that's actually somewhere you want to, to visit. And then finally, grammatical errors. If you're on a website and it looks like it was developed in the 90s and it's spelled in broken English and there is, hundreds of errors that you see, if it doesn't feel right as an application, it isn't going to be right. Companies spend thousands upon thousands of pounds on, kind of customer experience and feel on a website, kind of massive UX tests and UI tests and all sorts. If it's not right, then it's probably not a legitimate place or a good source to be purchasing or submitting data to anyway. Now, I told you we'd be back to passwords and passphrases. So we spoke about what some of the big issues are with having really weak passwords. And now there's kind of a nice little way to manage that. It's looking at the difference between passwords and passphrases. So a passphrase is basically a sequence of words or text or anything like that you can have and that it's easy to remember, versus a password, which is a random kind of length of characters. So a passphrase for me to create while I'm in my office might be wallet -phone -mug. Now, wallet -phone -mug is not a hard password to remember. And it's actually cryptographically really secure, because this brings me on to my point about password length. Now, when I say that kind of my computer can crack through 500,000 passwords in a second, it would take it probably under a minute to crack an 8-character password. Now, an 8-character password would be the word, for example, password. Putting an extra character on that to make it a 9-character password would actually take it up to about probably 3 or 4 hours. Making it a 10-character password would probably take it up to a week. Making it to 11-character password, it becomes a year, and then up to a 12-character password, it becomes inconceivable for somebody to sit there trying to brute force through guessing every single password combination that's possible for 12 characters. Now, wallet -phone -mug is longer than 12 characters, so it's going to be relatively cryptographically secure, whereas a password of the same length of 12 characters is going to be a lot harder to remember. It's always advised to go for a passphrase. And as you can see, I've just basically spoken about everything that I was going to have on the next slide anyway. But you can see down the bottom, you've got a nice little table which tells you that trying to crack the password or passphrase of logic finite eager ratio would take a hell of a long time in comparison to the password string that is above it. Now, as a business, there are certain cybersecurity kind of routes that you can take to ensure that you're secure. Obviously, I appreciate that at the moment things might be a little bit slow and cybersecurity is not really top of the list. But hopefully, at least if you're making yourself a bit more secure in your own time at home, some of these skills might be transferable into the businesses that you guys run or work for. So the first one is consider following a guideline or a framework when thinking about cybersecurity. There are a couple of really good organizations and accrediting bodies out there that have some frameworks and certs. around strong cybersecurity. And the first one is Cyber Essentials. Now, I believe Cyber Essentials is just a thing that's come to Canada very recently. But it essentially entails basic steps that your network or your company should take to ensure that you have the correct policies in place, that all of the machines are built to a good standard, they have antivirus, and then you get somebody come in and actually authenticate that for you and make sure you've done it all correctly, and then they'll give you a nice certificate at the end to say, well done, you've passed. Now, if you've got Cyber Essentials, or if you're looking for something that's a little bit more in depth, you've got ISO 27001 and the IASME Gold Standard. Now, obviously, ISO 27001 is a huge certification, and it will take a lot of time to achieve. That's why with a good auditor, you could at least maybe descope to a sensible size or sensible portion of the network. But this is going to be really looking at what kind of policies you have in place again, and certainly from a technical standpoint, it will be that ensuring that you have things like regular penetration tests, all of your systems are kept up to date, and you've got antivirus on everything. Now, I know guidelines might not be for everyone, and it might be a little bit much at the moment, especially if you're within a small organization. You don't want to have the likes of, kind of BSI coming in and auditing you. But one thing that you can do is perform internal vulnerability scanning. Now, as a pen tester, this is what I do naturally when I get onto every engagement. I perform a vulnerability scan to check for vulnerabilities. There are a few tools and pieces of software that anybody can use and anybody can download. They are commercial, so they do cost a little bit of money, but I don't think it's that bad for small businesses. But what these do is they periodically scan your system for any new threats internally or externally. So you could have a website and you could have a couple of servers in an office. You could use pieces of software like this to be able to identify any immediate security holes that will be there. Nessus and Tenable are the primary vulnerability scanners. These are what we use every day for scanning our clients. They're not overly expensive, and they're really easy to set up, and I think the support guys are actually over in Canada themselves, so they might actually be quite easy for you guys to get hold of. Ensure all hosts are up to date when you're performing vulnerability scanning, otherwise you're going to have a hell of a lot of issues with vulnerabilities flying up telling you that you've been naughty and you've hit postpone too many times in the 4 hours. And then obviously it's a really good idea to have antivirus or endpoint protection enabled on all those hosts. You could consider penetration testing. Now, penetration testing is really only viable if you're being asked to by a framework or a company you supply to, unless you've got kind of quite a strong security posture already and you're looking for a little bit of a test. If you think my network is really secure, it might be worth getting a penetration tester in to come and obviously clarify that for you to make sure that you are as secure as you think you are. And then finally, ensure that employees attend regular training sessions. Learning about cybersecurity and the threats that are out there is going to be the best way to essentially educate any of your staff members. Because at the end of the day, you could have all the technical security in the world, but if you've got a click-happy, member of staff that sees an attachment come into his inbox, which is bonus schedule 2020 or something like that, they're probably going to want to click on it. And it's really important to train people and tell them that it's not okay to click things because you don't know where it came from. And really, that's kind of it from my perspective today. I know that we have kind of spoken about quite a lot in a short amount of time. And if you can't tell that I can talk about this stuff forever. So I apologize if I've gone over my time period. I'm not entirely sure.
Thank you, Louie. That's really great and great stuff. Thank you for putting your contact information up there. That's awesome too. So everyone on the line, feel free to write that down. Contact Louie and or Sanjay. I had a few quick questions to kick things off. So a common strategy, IT strategy for the type of clients that we work with, because they're small businesses, is to put everything in the cloud as much as they can. So avoid having servers on site in the physical location, but just run everything using SaaS-based applications and storing things on Google Drive and Dropbox and other things. So can you comment on that as a strategy? Is that a good practice, or is that leaving the door open, or is that a good idea because you're leaving the security with those application providers, and presumably they've done a reasonable job.
Yeah, no, perfect. So generally, it's a little bit of hit and miss with whether storing all of your data in the cloud is better, because at the end of the day, you take the responsibility away from yourself. The more people that you entrust with your data, if they are to get breached in the future, then obviously that's something that you won't have any control of as somebody using that service. And just be aware that when you start using more and more and more different services, you're obviously kind of creating a wider threat landscape for attackers to go after, because you're entering your personal data in more places. On the flip side, if you have an office which has this data on an on-premise server, at the end of the day, your data is your responsibility. But if you do get breached, you've got no one to blame. And at the end of the day, if that one server on your network gets breached, you've probably lost everything. So it's a little bit of hit and miss. But I do know that kind of in 2020, certainly with what's going on, we are moving more serverless and more into the cloud. And I personally think it's a good thing. I think that it allows. I think the risks of cybersecurity aren't able to outweigh the practicality that having everything in the cloud can offer somebody.
Cool, thank you. So generally speaking, it's a good strategy, but sort of limit the applications, the number of applications that you're using. Okay. Yeah,
it's a good strategy, but perhaps pick something like you're going to do all of your work on, I don't know, Windows, so like Office 365 and SharePoint and Teams. Or you're going to be on the flip side, you're going to look at the G Suite and you're going to do everything on Google Drive and Google Docs and Gmail. It's better to pick one service that kind of offers what you need, rather than picking and pulling different parts from each solution to meet your needs.
Cool. You mentioned antivirus as being a good idea. Obviously, Windows Defender comes with Windows 10. Is there another antivirus product that you recommend?
There's a few really good ones. Sophos put out a really good antivirus. It's quite cheap. They also do kind of a web filter as well. There's an antivirus that we actually use called Panda, which is slightly less well known, but it is cheaper than some of the more mainstream ones that you'll be aware of. And then obviously you've got some of the other ones such as Kaspersky and McAfee as well.
Those are great. Any questions from anyone on the line?
I think there's some coming through on the chat.
Okay. How about ESET?
Yeah, ESET's absolutely fine as well. I've come across it on a couple of tests where I haven't been able to get past it, just due to some of the kind of surrounding conditions. So it is really strong.
Okay. Keep those questions coming. I've just got a few slides to run through for the wrap up. Are we now back to seeing my screen?
Yes, we've got you now.
Perfect. So just a couple of closing comments from me, touching on what Louie was saying, is making sure that your people are participating here. So our HR practice manager asked me to include this slide, making sure you have something in your policies manual that touches on use of computer equipment or bring your own device, how that should be done, and having to have antivirus, security of passphrases and not sharing them on Slack channels and things like that, having an NDA, requiring, let's say, if you are using Google Drive or OneDrive, requiring that it's stored there, the training piece, and having some mechanism for enforcement. So let's say you do a penetration test or there is a breach, or you identify some vulnerability as having a procedure that you follow to take the team members through. And she also wanted to say, make it easy. So have tools in place that people can use to make cybersecurity easy for themselves. The more gates and barriers you put up, the harder you make people's work, the less likely that they are going to comply with the policies. So looking for those. The CFO take is really about risk management and business continuity, using accounting systems. I think we just touched on use of cloud-based accounting systems, really good policy, making sure that you set the user rights. There are too many admin level accounts out there on a lot of the back office tools that we see, so making sure those permissions are set correctly, and having some internal controls. So some of these phishing scams can be mitigated as well by having, say, payment approvals process. You can't send a wire transfer to somebody unless 2 people approve of it, for instance, or unless it actually goes through a system for payments versus just, hey, an email that comes through, can you wire transfer somebody, or a phone call. No, it has to go through a system, and then there's an approvals process. And then on the back end, having audit trails and notifications and just designing process. So those are a couple of little last points on there. And I think we have to wrap it up here. So I'll just leave this on the slide for upcoming things. Coming up in about half an hour, we've got Startup Vancouver's Collins session. Always has what keeps you up at night. Last week was amazing. We had Ava Song, we had Keith from Volition, Eric from This Fish, some great people on that chat. And so keep up the good work, Colin. That's been amazing. Next week, we've got the folks from Giraffe coming. I'm very excited to have. So Blake is almost a celebrity in accounting land. And Evan Wells, very experienced in financial forecasting and modeling, and they're going to take us through Giraffe technology for budgeting and forecasting in 2020, and how to do that being really nimble, where you have to change your forecast as the pivots unfold, and that can be hard to do in old clunky spreadsheet models. And so how do we do that with live data in a real system? So great. And then coming up, actually, we're taking a summer break the week of June 30th. So there will be no QT chats, but we'll be back the following week with some inspiration. So stay tuned for those things. So that is all for today. I'm leaving the contact information again up here on the final slide. And all that remains to be said is thank you. Thank you very, very much to yourself, Louie, and Sanjay, for coming on and being willing to take us through this and answer questions, for Colin for your support, and for all of you who joined and participated and helped share about these talks to help support our business community. So thank you, everyone, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Have an enjoyable Tuesday.
Thanks, Ian.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, guys.
Take care.
Right. Cheers.
Okay, bye-bye.